Thank you all for joining us for part 2 of our Seed Saving and Food Sovereignty panel. I will let the three of you take it away from here.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Cassandra. So hi, everybody. My name is Rachel Waugh, and I am the director and founder of Museum of Food and Culture, which is a new startup museum, and we are working to co-create a community that uses food as between history, cultures, and personal experiences. And I'm so excited for this conversation today with Dr. Rebecca Webster and Angela Ferguson. And so I wanted to just get started. Would you guys give a little bit of an intro about your backgrounds? Angela, are you good to start?
Sure.
Awesome, thank you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Angela Ferguson. I'm from the Onondaga Nation. I'm a member of the Eel Clan, and I'm happy to be here today to talk about my work with our ancestral foods, grains, many different things that we grow here. It's my passion, and I really enjoy sharing information with others, anything that I can.
Wonderful, thank you. And Dr. Webster, would you mind going as well?
Sure. Sagoi swagweg, Ganyeta Gay, Nyunget, some Guehwene, Becky Webster, Nyungets, Oatslunige, Wagwaho Niwagit to load, Oniondaga, Niwagura Humwajot, Delunkawane, Neatwagenu. So I said, hello, everybody. My name is Ganyeta Gale, which means snow scattered here and there, trying to protect the land. My English name is Becky Webster. I'm Wolf Clan, I'm Oneida, and I grew up near Duck Creek in Oneida. So I am just super excited to be here with one of my most favorite mentors, Angela Ferguson. She really helped us get going with our seeds. And we've been growing the seeds that she's given us out here in Oneida and sharing those with the community, and they're making their ways around here. So we am one of the founding members of a co-op here in Oneida that grows our indigenous white corn together. And we also, a few years ago, decided to change plans for what we were doing with our lives and create a homestead on 10 acres. So we're relatively new to this, but we are so excited to be on this journey.
Awesome, thank you. And I would love to hear a little bit more too about how you each got started on this journey. Angela, would you mind telling a little bit about your background, how you got started with seed saving and interested in food sovereignty?
Sure, absolutely. I grew up on the Tuscarora Nation, even though I'm Onondaga. That was my my first home, and it was a huge agricultural community. So we grew up surrounded by cornfields and husking bees and field trips to the farms and things like that. And pretty much every one of our families out there had some type of connection to farming and agriculture. And I moved out here to the Onondaga Nation about 15 years ago, which is my ancestral homeland. And I'm the first person in my family to return back. So I'm happy about that. And when I grew my own gardens here in Onondaga, I noticed that there weren't as many cornfields and things as such that I was used to seeing growing up. So I was really interested to get back involved with that here. And originally I started working in an elder's garden that was here. And the food was grown for the people who really couldn't, just couldn't maintain gardens on their own anymore. So there was a community garden that was strictly for elderly people in the community that the younger people would grow the food and harvest and everything. And as it was prepared for, to be ready to eat, we would deliver it to their houses. And through that process, it was a really great idea because I got to actually meet every single one of the elders that was here in this community, and they would invite me in to visit, and I would hear their stories about their gardening days and their techniques and their recipes. And so I learned a lot through that elders garden, and a lot of them aren't here anymore. So I'm really thankful that that was how I started out here, because I got to really understand the connections that a lot of these people had to the land. And so I thought, why can't we expand it further than the elders to the entire community? And, I saw that we have a lot of food related illnesses in our community. And my dream was always to see everybody getting back to the traditional indigenous diets. And over time, for the last 10 years, that's what we've been doing here. And it's really been a success. And we decided, okay, we're helping our own nation, but can't we expand now to the other nations? And so we started helping out other nations in our own Iroquois Confederacy here, our Haudenosaunee Confederacy. And then even on to that, through Braiding the Sacred, we moved on to nations outside the Confederacy as well. So we've been all over Turtle Island, from coast to coast, and we've been helping different people reconnect with their ancestral foods.
Wow, that's incredible. Thank you for sharing that and talking about how much food has kind of been that community basis for you, and also a way for knowledge sharing. So Dr. Webster, would you mind going as well and kind of sharing your experience and how you got involved? I know that your story intersects happily with Angela's. And so, yeah, would you tell how you got interested in seed saving and food sovereignty?
Sure. Like I mentioned, I'm relatively new to this. I've only been doing it about 6 or 7 years. So my husband and I both had really demanding, busy careers. We were raising our 2 young daughters at the time. And we would come to the tribe has a farm, it's called Junhenqua, meaning life sustenance, where the tribe grows the corn for the community. And we'd go there every year and we'd help at harvest time. And, then they would take those, the harvest and then have it processed at the tribal cannery and then sell the corn at the Oneida market. So when we got hungry for our corn in different meals, corn soup, cornbread, we would just go to the cannery and purchase it. Really, we didn't think much of it. We don't come from agricultural families. There are some families here in the community that do and have continued to grow it on their own, but we were really relying on the tribe for that. And then the tribe did such a good job of getting people in the community interested in eating more of our indigenous foods, so much so that they could not keep up with the demand. So regularly at the market, they would have signs that said, sorry, there's no more corn here. And people would get just mad. They would be, why isn't there enough corn? What's going on? What's happening? And then a few of us families got together and said, well, wait a minute. Maybe we should do something about that. We shouldn't always rely on the government to fix these problems for us. So as a community, we all got together. Most of us had no idea what we were doing. We thought, oh, we've been to a few husking bees over the years at Junhenqua. We got this, right? Well, we didn't have this, but we gave it a try, and our corn responded beautifully to us. We had an amazing harvest. We still didn't really know what we were doing. I think that first year of our co-op, Ange came out and helped us, showed us different things, and really catapulted us into this really a deeper understanding and a connection with our corn. And just as every year went by, we were able to grow more corn, grew different varieties. And at home, like I mentioned before, we left our careers. I became a university professor, so I have summers off. My husband left his career and he now homeschools our daughters. So we just had a really huge life change. And now on our homestead, we this summer was a bit different because of COVID, but we host tours. We have events here. We have classes here on how to do things. And we even started a YouTube channel on this learning journey. So we have so much to learn, but we feel those little tidbits of information that we have learned, we want to be able to share those with other people who don't have the opportunities to get to know that stuff the way we did, because this is also new and exciting to us. We thought that we wanted to really get other people excited about it too. So Angela has given us a number of varieties of corn, beans, and squash, and sunflowers especially, that we continue to grow out here at our farm. And then in turn, we share those with the community. So we have a lot of community members, especially this year, because of COVID, people really stopped to think about what our food systems and how they're broken. And you know, the things that you just go and buy from the grocery store, we kind of take that for granted, and we don't always know where it's coming from, what chemicals were used on it, how was this processed, how old is it. So we had a lot of people that were interested in growing some of our gardens, and I had planned to help people, but because of COVID, we couldn't quite make that happen. But what we were able to do is do social distance porch trades. So I packaged up a whole bunch of seeds, and I put them in had little labels on them with little instructions, and I would put those on the porch, and then people would come and take some, and then, you know, leave a jar of jelly or maybe some honey behind as a trade for them. And then throughout the summer, they would send these really amazing pictures, and oh my gosh, look at what these beans look like. Have you seen this? This is so beautiful. Or what else? They would send panicked questions about things. What's happening here? And it was just so funny because I'll text Angela every now and then, what's going on with these beans? Or how come this looks that way? Because I have so much to learn. And it was nice to be able to pay that forward to some other people who are also new to growing and reestablishing those relationships with our seeds.
That's awesome, and incredible how seed saving for you has become kind of this learning along with your community experience, just like it was for Angela. So kind of to build off of that, I want to jump in with some of the topics that we had discussed in our pre-meeting about thinking of the different ways that traditional knowledge and kind of Western scientific studies can align, and how those things converge for you guys, and how kind of knowledge sharing contributes to food sovereignty and seed saving with your experience.
Whoops, sorry. Well, for me, I think the scientific arena has now proven a lot of the things that Native people have actually been doing for a long time with the knowledge and the relationship that they've had with their land and environments. And one of the main things that the Haudenosaunee people had as a responsibility that was given to them at the time, from the beginning of time till now, I guess you could say, is that we are the caretakers of what we call Turtle Island, which is here, North America, this continent. And so that's a huge responsibility for people. And I think when it comes to like our younger people learning these educations, finding a pathway where you can connect those two educations of understanding the way, you know, the explanations that come in another language. Science is really just another form of language. And so understanding that the scientific language sometimes actually coincides with the indigenous ways of doing things. It's not really that they're different. It's just that they're explained in a different language. And so that's been kind of interesting for some of our young people, because like my next vision, I guess you could say, when it comes to the seed saving and things like that, is teaching that as an actual, like a class. So for young people, that could actually be the science class. That little square garden can be everything they measure, that they talk about, and that they experience and have that relationship. So for me, I think it starts with our younger generations and teaching them the things that we know, that we could actually meld into some type of form of education. You know, there's actually hands-on learning. It's the best way for the younger people to learn. And I think right now, even with this pandemic occurring and a lot of the kids being at home and doing online things and stuff like that, this is a perfect time to have gardening and things like that as a science class, because you're still having a safe environment. You're still being able to just, you know, keep yourself in a small area with a few people, where all of the social distancing requirements could even be met. You know, a lot of times being in the garden alone is actually very healthy. And I think it's also the cure for a lot of the things that the social issues, like the sadness and the depression that occurs when you're isolated. So, you know, all of those things combined, the kids, that's where we're going to get the interest, you know, is by utilizing that scientific knowledge with the indigenous ways of doing things, to see that they're actually, they can coincide. And that if we can learn to be more connected with the land, instead of thinking that we need to control it. So that's where I see there needs to be that understanding that it's an actual relationship. So if you were in a good relationship with a human, you wouldn't want to control them. You would want to, you know, kind of mesh with that person and move side by side. And that's exactly how I think our planting procedures and the scientific methods, where things are kind of falling apart in the big agriculture arena, or a lot of reliances upon machinery and things like that, that human connection of the element that's missing.
Yeah, I would echo some of the discussion about how modern science is just reconfirming some of the things that we had, our original instructions talk about them. And I think it's a more holistic, and I think it's a more appropriate way to see things from the eyes of our teachings. So even though, you know, we might have a good grasp of the science behind things, I like to think of it in terms of the way our ancestors thought of it. And it just really pulls in all of the different aspects of all of creation together. And it's not singling out one thing or the other. So for example, so I have here a braid of our Haudenosaunee black sweet corn. And if you'll notice, it's kind of skinny and it's kind of short and it's very dark and it's very wrinkly. So, and this kind of thing has happened before. So I planted this in a field, and then during harvest time, I was harvesting, and then these two cobs came up. Notice they're huge compared to that corn. They're very plump, so they're not wrinkly, and they have these beautiful colors to them. So when things like this happen, of course, I'm, you know, on the phone with Angela, what's going on with my corn? And I love the way that she explained it. And she said that this corn, she's remembering her relatives. So we can talk about cross-pollination and the science behind that, but really what I'm interested in, what does this mean to us? What is this corn trying to tell us? And if you work with the corn and you work with these foods, you're not going to learn stuff from a book or from, you know, your science classes. The food will tell you. And I always wondered what it meant when they said the plants talk to you. I was always envisioning, you know, hearing them say something, and other people have had that happen. I'm still waiting for that to happen, but they really do talk to you. You can tell when the plants are happy. You can tell when the plants need something. And if you just give them the time and attention and care, and they'll really respond to you. So I think it's, you know, looking at the soil health, but being able to still have that mindset of it's a relationship with that food, and there are relatives and we need to take care of them. And if we approach it from looking at it from that perspective, I think we are still pulling in that science in there, but we're doing so in a way that makes sense to our people.
Awesome. I would love to circle back with you. Both of you, when we talked earlier, told stories of kind of different messages being told through the food. Of course, the that one example of the corn remembering its relatives, but also like the little baby corn. And I would love to just hear some of those stories and kind of what you're taking from those messages of what the food is conveying to you.
Well, there's so many, I don't know. There's so many stories. This year, I had a very emotional experience with the corn. You know, I had suffered an injury back in August, and I was kind of laid up for a while. And that's not like me, because I sleep for probably 3 or 4 hours a day. And I was just like, I have to get out of this bed. Even though I'm in pain, I have to get in that cornfield. I felt like it was calling me. So as much pain as I was in, I dragged myself up and I went over to the cornfield, and I was barely able to stand up for more than maybe an hour at a time at that particular time. But I went into the garden, and the corn leaves like crisscrossed over my shoulders. That my injury was on my right shoulder and in my neck. And it kind of like hugged me. It kind of crisscrossed over me. It was almost choking me around my neck. And I just was like, I just stopped and I paused, and I could like feel the energy of the plant wrapping around me. It was like enveloping me. And we have stories in some of our teachings that talk about that actually occurring to people, you know, in the past that have shared that experience. I never had it before, but this was the first time, and I was so thankful because I felt like I got some kind of power from that, or I can't explain it, but I felt so good after I left there. I was so glad I went in there. I was surrounded. The plants were in full bloom, and they were, you know, 10 feet. Some of them were 12, 14. They were huge plants, and they were 14 feet high. And I'm just, you know, I'm just this little small person in this big cornfield. And when it did that to me, I mean, it really did heal me because my shoulder bounced back. I was able to be okay for harvesting time. We had our ceremonies right after that. And so that voice, you know, that when it was wrapped around me that I heard was like, you know, it was kind of like, you're going to be okay. You're going to be all right. You'll be okay. And I do feel like that even now. So I think it was an experience that I'm meant to share with people because, you know, sometimes they say seeing is believing. And so for me, you know, I had the experience myself and I was so thankful. And one other thing that I was thinking about, because I kind of thought you might ask this question. So I brought one of these out and I'll try to let you see closely what it is. Okay. So this is what we call, can you see here? This is grandfather corn. So this is one of the ancient corns from the beginning of time. This is the ancestor to every single kind of corn that you guys see growing. There was teosinte, which was the very original first one that grew wild. And this one is the one that came after. So this for us is called our Oneida, which is our original corn. And so this particular one, it comes in two forms, that original corn. There's a male and a female version of the plant. And sometimes you'll get female, 7 or 8 cobs will grow on one stalk. And this one is like amazing because at the time that it showed up, which was last year, we didn't know the message. Okay, so if you can see here, each one of these little husks at the end of it is the seed. The seed is wrapped in husks like a blanket. And inside of there is one big female. These ones with the long husks are the female version of the plant. So this kind of had popped out of it. This was the head almost. And this had kind of just because it was dry, it had come off. But inside, you're able to see the seeds. And surrounding it, the big female in the center, are all these little tiny ones. There's little tiny separate cobs of corn all the way around it. And these are all supposed to be children, right? So sometimes they call these storytellers or grandmothers. And at the time we were wondering, what does this mean, right? But now you see that we have all of our children home with us, right? They can't go to school. They're not allowed to be where they normally are required to be as per the law, you know, that they have to be at school. Now, all the things we've been wishing for is that these children could come back and kind of be more in our care, and we have a little more say in what we consider to be education to them, you know. So I have my grandchildren here with me today at the farm. They're here all the time. They grew up here and they're going to continue to grow up here. So their education occurs here, in between online classes. They can play at the farm. But also, I think that grandmother was telling us, like, it's going to be that time where we have to stop what we're doing and pause our busy lives. And now you're going to have all these people looking at you. What are you going to teach us? We're here. We're sitting right here. We're given to you, you know. So I feel like part of this pandemic is actually a blessing. You know, they say, be careful what you wish for, because your wish may come true. So now we wish that we had our children around us more. Now we have that ability to, you know, be a little more proactive and participating in their education. And I think at the time that we didn't see it, we got a lot of those that year. That was just one example of what I'm showing you, but there were so many. And a lot of us that work here at the farm, by the way, we're all women. All the people doing the agriculture here, we do everything by hand. So we don't use any fossil fuels. We don't have any tractors. We use our old Iroquois methods of slash and burn and crop rotation for our gardens. So we're trying to show people in different communities that if you don't have the money for equipment and you don't have these certain things, it can be done. So there were 5 women here this year in 2020, and we grew 12 acres of food by hand. We planted it all, we prepared it, we hilled it up. We did the weed pulling not once, but twice. And we harvested, over almost 500 braids of corn. So there's only 5 of us. So if 5 women that really dedicate themselves with their passion to doing something like that in a community, it can be done. And that's what we try to do, is encourage young people, because we don't turn any kids away. We want all the kids here. We want to teach them how to braid corn. We want them to know how to plant. My grandchildren planted their own corn this year. We had several people come up from the nation and say, our kids are out of school. What should we do? Bring them up to the farm, and they can do whatever they want here, and a lot of the people have actually become interested, especially the young girls, in the seed keeping part of it, because people don't realize that when you plant, you need to save the seeds for the next year's harvest. So that seed keeping is a whole nother technique and art form. So every single seed in this farm has been touched by human hands, because we wipe them all off. We treat every single one like they're sacred, So these experiences that we see come out of the corn, and it's amazing. And not only that, with what I have had happen last year, is this year, I might even have it here. I'll have to show it. So
This is my favorite part.
Okay, I had a little teeny tiny cob of corn here. And this little cob of corn, if you can see my finger, okay, my finger is about maybe 2 inches. Teosinte was growing out of this in our red cornfield. So, this kind of even verifies the last question you talked about with the science and everything like that. There's this academic dispute. Did the corn originate from Teosinte? Was it another wild grass? How did the indigenous people domesticate that plant, etc.? But here is the ancestor to all of these things show up in a cornfield without the seed of it being planted. So to me, this is like our science right here. And this tells me now it's time to go back to the ancient ways, go back to the very beginning and kind of start over. And that's what we're doing. We're working backwards in time to learn how to go back to our ancient ways. And some of us don't actually know all of those things. So then it causes us to go on this search where we're speaking to elders and, learn from we can travel from nation to nation. There's all different tribes all across this whole continent here, and we all had relationships at one time. So now there's these oral traditions that we've been sharing and learning things about. And to me, it's all so valuable. It creates these food pathways and connections. So that's been my experience this year.
I love that. Thank you so much for doing the show and tell. It's one of my favorite parts. Becky, do you have some stories you'd like to share as well? I remember we mentioned some last time.
Yeah, so the one that actually comes to mind also deals with the grandmother corn. And that's the corn with each kernel has an individual husk on it. And I've grown that for a few years now. So a little bit about our family history is we're very Christianized, and nobody really from our family went to Longhouse. That's where we practice our traditional ceremonies. Several years ago, actually probably about 10 or 15 years ago, my grandpa's brother, my Uncle Jim, decided he's gonna start to go to Longhouse. And several years ago, our family decided we're going to too. So we were the only ones from our family that were at the Longhouse, and I would look across because he's in a different clan than I am, and he'd be across the way, and we'd see each other, and it would just be a really great thing to be able to see him there. I'm going to try to do this without crying, but he passed away last year. And so one of our chiefs that lives here, Bob Brown, he was really patient and kind with our family because my uncle wanted to, wanted to have the ceremonies in our longhouse, how we traditionally buried our people. And my family never experienced that before. So he was so kind and patient and understanding with that. I wanted to thank him for that. And I had no idea, how do you thank somebody who is going above and beyond what anybody would expect you to do? So I went to our field in our harvest. He passed away in November. And I looked at and I picked out the beautifulest, most perfect grandfather cob of corn, and I wanted to share that with him. So through this whole process, at the end of 10 days after somebody passes, you have a death feast. And at that, right before the feast, I went up to him and I said, I want to thank you for everything you've been doing and answering my family's probably pretty bizarre questions, because this is all new to them. And I said, I want to give you this. And he thanked me, and we carried on. We had the ceremony, we had the death feast and everything that goes along with that. About a month later, I remember I was doing some research for a project on our corn I was doing, and it was by a Seneca anthropologist, Arthur Parker. And I've read the book before, and I never really thought much about it. And there was a provision in there that said that it was customary to give somebody a kernel or a cob of corn to invite them to the death feast. And if you accepted the corn, that meant that you had to go to the death feast. And I said, wow, that's kind of crazy. So I copied that section and I sent it over to Bob and I said, check this out. Look what this book is saying. This was in Parker's book. And he says, oh, I forgot all about that. I haven't thought about that. And then he proceeded to tell me about this memory he had when he was a young boy, and he found a kernel of corn laying somewhere weird, and he picked it up and he asked his grandfather what that kernel of corn meant. And his grandpa said, oh, that's right. That's because I had been invited to go to a death feast, and this means that I need to go. And he said that for the longest time that wasn't a memory that had surfaced until I had given him that corn and told him about the passage in that. So I don't know what it is that was telling me that I needed to do that. I mean, I could have given him tobacco, I could have given him food, I could have given him all kinds of things, but for some reason, that one cob is what I wanted to share. And then that then in turn triggered some of memories that he was able to share with me. So yeah. Sorry for for getting a little teary there.
I'm glad it's
that's
you. Usually I'm the one
incredible.
crying every time I talk about corn.
Right? I was like, wait a
Emotionally,
minute, I'm not gonna cry first.
We have an ongoing joke because every time we talk about these at the Braiding the Sacreds, where there's always somebody that ends up crying, and we're always saying, it's not going to be me this time. And then I remember we had one of the gentlemen from Oneida, Wisconsin. He was like, I never cry. Give me that corn. I'll stand up and talk. And he didn't even finish his sentence.
Oh my gosh. And so a funny story, we were at one of the Braiding the Sacred events in Ho-Chunk territory. And my family and I went there, but I actually had to teach that weekend too. So I had to scoot out for a bit to go teach and come back. And I was feeling really salty that I had to leave this beautiful event. And I was kind of crabby about it. And, we left our kids with friends and family that stayed at the event. And when I got to the classroom, one of my students, do I even still have it? I think it's in another room, but she, where is it? Huh. But I go in the classroom and she has this red cob of corn. And I was like, whoa, that's cool. What is that for? She said, out of my whole entire white cornfield, these 2 red cobs came up, and I thought of you and I thought I'd have to give this to you. And of course, I'm in class, I'm like, oh my gosh, right, crying. And then, it turned out to be a really good experience that I had to go back for class. And I come back and we're all having a talking circle to talk about corn and whatnot. And I happen to have this cob of corn in my hand. And, we're going around and it's my turn to talk. And I bring up the cob and I say, and one of my students gave me this corn, and I lost it and I couldn't even finish, right? So my girls, they're teenagers, right? Little evil teenagers. that whole weekend, and even still, I would hear them to each other. You know, they'd walk around, "If my student gave me this corn," but you little brats, they were mocking me the whole.
It'll be their turn one time. It'll be their turn. Yep.
Yes.
Everyone, they get bit by the bug.
Yes, I'm sure. And you know, as much as we make fun of these kids for, being teens or, their attitudes or whatnot, it is so amazing to be able to have them around our gardens and our foods and our cooking and just immerse them in this. And sometimes we think that they're not paying attention, but I really love the times where I overhear my daughters talking to somebody else about this and explaining things and talking about our foods. Like, they're really listening. They are really understanding that. I think we don't give them enough credit sometimes, but they're really absorbing this stuff and taking it in. Yeah.
Yeah, they are. That's for sure.
I love that. That's excellent stories about corn. Thank you both for sharing. And your children making fun of you. That seems like a very classic thing. Pivoting a little bit, because I'm also mindful of time. I'm interested in thinking about like food sovereignty and sustainable agriculture, particularly in relationship to climate change. How have you guys thought about climate change in relation to the farms that you work on and kind of the teaching practices that you're engaged with?
Well, I'm at a different point in time, so I don't speak that language called climate change. I call it now climate adaptation, because the change has already happened. So now for us as Haudenosaunee people, that's been our lifelong motto, is adapt or die, because if you cannot adapt, you're not going to survive. So what we can do from my perspective, what we've been doing is, like I said, going back to the ancient ways of doing things, and we're kind of adapting to circumstances. So when it comes to the seeds are so amazing and resilient, and they carry so much memory and history. And, even if you just hold one little seed and you think like that, you think how powerful that one seed, that is the sovereignty. If you have one seed, you can feed yourself. And so we take those seeds to different parts of the country here now. So we have the same seeds that's maybe indigenous to this area, right? Northeastern woodlands foods. We take them out to the Midwest so they have time to adapt to the climate there, and we have people grow them there. We've taken them over to Portland, Oregon, so they're growing in the Northwest and they can adapt to the climate there. We've taken them down to the deserts in New Mexico and all that area. We've taken them to the panhandle of Oklahoma. We have them growing in the Southeast now, so that they're adapting to each particular climate, because as our earth is heating up and the temperature is rising, the corn needs time to adjust to those things. So we're just like people, right? If you move to a new city, it takes you a while to get your way around the area, understand what the temperatures are like, the amount of daylight hours you have, and things like that. The corn and different seeds, I've noticed that after 2 to 3 years, they will do just fine in your area. So I always tell everybody that first year, you're not going to get a great harvest. Your corn's going to look a little rough because it's kind of in shock. It doesn't know where it is. And it takes a little time and love and nurturing and keep growing it, keep on, adapting it to that climate. So I've found that that's actually been a very great way of making the corn be very, not just corn. We've had beans, sunflowers, squashes. We've had the seeds of our 3 sisters growing all over. And this year I actually brought up some wild potatoes that I dug up from the Pueblo of Acoma, and I got permission to bring some back here. I had, I think, 12 potatoes, 12. They're just like little stones. They're no bigger than maybe a quarter, not even, I would say maybe a nickel. And so I took those potatoes out and I brought them here, and I was like, I'm going to see if I can tame a wild food, if I can actually get it to grow like in a row, all nice and neat, not just like a weed loose. And sure enough, they just start popping up and they just took off. And it was like my highlight of my growing season is that, I reconnected with another one of our Haudenosaunee foods, which is potatoes, and I was so excited that I had to send pictures to the leadership there in the Pueblo of Acoma to let them know, look at how they're thriving here. And they couldn't believe it, because they're used to growing in sand in the desert and everything like that. And now they're growing up in quite a cold temperature up here. And, for them, it's not cold for us, but I think adapting to the different situations has been something that's non-threatening to the environment. And it's also a good way to look out for the seeds for the future generations, because sometimes the temperatures are going to rise, it's all moving north. And a lot of our foods are actually moving north too, where our corn belt used to be across the middle of the country. It's moving north towards Canada. And right, even where Becky lives now in Wisconsin, Minnesota, Michigan, all of these northern states, right, that border Canada, a lot of our foods are thriving in those areas, and they're actually jumping over that border to Canada. So our people have always migrated north. We've had to migrate south during times of cold. So we have to kind of follow the foods. And I also believe that one of the things that people call invasive species or weeds, those things are very important, because one of the things I learned this year is that these plants speak a language that some people can actually speak. They can actually hear it, translate it, they understand it. I'm not there yet. I would be honored if someday I will ever get to that point, but I do know people who do have that ability. I have known people that have that ability, and they call upon helpers. That's one thing I've learned. So, for example, last year, our entire field was surrounded by like these huge burdock plants and these big, huge prickers. And we didn't want to pull them out because we're pulling weeds by hand. I was like, well, let's just leave them. And that's when I found this out. Like, actually, the corn called that plant to surround the entire cornfield so that animals wouldn't get in there. And, it kept out all of the deer and, the little wildlife that would run into a garden. So sometimes if you be more cooperative with nature, instead of like trying to, compel yourself to fight against it, but work with it, there's changes that you naturally will make that can be helpful. Water is the most important treasure that we have, and we don't water any of our plants. We solely rely on rain. And when we don't have, people say, what do you do when you don't have rain? I say, we have the ceremony to call the rain, and it always comes. So it depends on your level of belief, and I think your level in cooperation with nature.
So last year we had a record-breaking wet year for us, and where our homestead is, we have a high water table anyway. So the water table here is so high and it's so wet, we weren't able to put a full basement in our house when we were making our house, or we were building our house. So our plants, one of the garden plots that we had was actually completely underwater for a week. And we just thought, well, nothing's going to come there. That's okay. We tried, we're just learning, and stuff came out of that garden and it was fine. Those seeds were just fine. In our other gardens, they struggled, they really did, but they produced. And we know that those seeds that they produced are survivors. They are adapting, they are changing, they're going to be ready to bring us into this changing times that we're experiencing right now. So we knew that we had to do things a little bit differently based on our environment here and how it's getting even wetter. So we decided we're going to go all out and have Three Sisters mounds. So we had over 100 mounds here that we planted our corn, beans, and squash together in, and they really thrived. So when it was really wet and it rained hard, you would look and the aisles might be a little bit wet, but the plants were never standing in water anymore. And we planted some corn in regular rows too, just because we had extra corn and we wanted to plant her. And that corn really struggled because it was a lot lower. It was wet. It didn't sprout as fast. It didn't grow as tall. It didn't handle the beans as well that were growing with them. So we're just learning that there's so much more to our original ways of doing things that make sense in different circumstances. So for us and our family, the circumstances here are that we need to plant more in mounds and plant the three sisters together as companions. It's like Angela was talking about those pickery plants. That's what our squash did over here in our gardens. They cover the ground, keep the weeds out, keep the moisture in the soil. But if you've ever, messed around with squash leaves and vines, they're pretty prickly and they get, they get kind of irritating. So those really help stop the animals from coming in, and we had no animal damage at any of our corn this year. So we were very lucky in that regard. We had some birds, but apparently the squash didn't deter the birds, so as it shouldn't. But one of the other things that we're also trying to do is keep our seeds in rotation. So I'm still learning about our seeds, but from what I understand is they don't always like to just sit on a shelf somewhere. They want to be planted. They want to be in the ground and to fulfill their responsibilities to either be food or be seed again for next generation. And as with a lot of things, I get carried away. And this year I got carried away again with my bean varieties, and I had over 20 varieties. So, I mean, it's just, that's insane. Who does that? That's crazy. So I just said, I know, right? Why do we do this? Because this variety, like Angela's like, oh, check out this variety. I'm like, oh, I need to grow her. And then, all these other people will come across and give you these beans. And then, oh, I can make room for her over here so she doesn't cross with anybody else or whatnot. So, but I thought, I need to do something else here. So actually just yesterday, I put a notice out on social media for our community here locally to say, who wants to help me grow out these bean varieties? We're going to start an informal bean cooperative where we're going to keep these in rotation. Because if somebody, if I get 3 or 4 people and they grow out 3 or 4 varieties, or maybe even 1 or 2 varieties, maybe we need 6 people or 7 people, and it'll be great, right? And that would just be a big help and alleviate a lot of the stresses of trying to do too many varieties. Well, within, I think, 8 hours of me posting that, I had 28 people sign up and make a commitment to grow out some of these seeds. So I was like, oh my gosh, so this is going to be really exciting. I'm a little nervous about it, but I think it's going to be really great to be able to share these seeds with our community. And then the idea is that when they grow it out, they'll grow, they'll send seeds back. And this way we can keep those seeds in a healthy rotation to make sure they're not just sitting on a shelf somewhere, and make sure that they're fulfilling their responsibilities, making sure that as they grow year after year, they're adapting to our changing climate, and they're being able to work with us instead of having to, spring them out of a jar in 20 years and hope that they can still thrive.
That's awesome. I have seeds for you for that project if you want. I did 32 varieties. I know, I did go crazy. You know what? I got these seeds. They were 1,400 years old. Wow. They were given to me at the Youth and Elders Conference by a Hopi man there who just made friends with me years ago, and he's always given me little gifts. He gave me, I think I had 6. No, I had 8 seeds. That's what he gave me. 8, and he told me to put it as part of my bundle that I always carry with me. And I thought, I'm going to plant those. I wonder if they would grow, because he got them from a cave out in Arizona, one of their archaeological sites. And he had different seeds many different things that were there, but these were like really old. And I thought, oh my gosh, I wonder if they'll grow. And I just had the vibe to plant them, and they did.
Nice.
And I couldn't believe it. Yeah. So out of that first little bunch, I got this little jar, this little mason jar cap full to start with. Yeah, I haven't counted them all yet because there's 2 more plants out there. But out of my 8, I got more, and I'll just keep building it up. So he was like, I can't believe they grew. I go, me neither. Wow.
They really wanted to come back for you. That's for sure.
So, sometimes science doesn't jive with indigenous information, because they say a seed only has a shelf life, right, of this long. And I've planted corn that was a few hundred years old, and it grew, so it's like I said, it's all sometimes it's a matter of faith.
Didn't somebody find some beans in the rafters of the longhouse or something?
Yeah, Roger found them, and those beans were, we don't know. We actually will not ever know how long those beans were up there, because the oldest man in that community was 96 or something. He's passed now. That man passed away. He was close to 100 anyway. But he said, I've never seen anybody put food up there in my entire life. So it had to have happened before my generation. So we don't really know, but he said, I'll grow them, I'll plant them. And he planted them, and we keep those. I grew those this year too. And we couldn't believe it because people had not seen them. So it was pretty amazing.
Wow. So I am getting the, the note that it is almost time to wrap up. We had a couple questions that I was hoping we could just kind of go through rapid fire, because I didn't want to cut you, either of you off with your amazing stories. So Jennifer asked, how best can the seeds for corn be protected from cross-pollination with GMOs?
Well, for me, I do what I call the GMO dance, because what you have to do is really connect with the person that's farming around you. If you don't actually know that person, I paid attention to the cornfields around me for years, and I documented when did their pollen flow, when do they plant, and I danced around, because I know my seeds and I know how many days from the minute I put it in, the pollen will drop, so that those two things aren't crossing at the same time. So it's this whole informational, that's like a whole nother workshop, but that's something that you really need to learn, because it has to be taught. Not how many days does it take for you to plant and then have food at the end, but when does the pollen fly in the middle, and when does it accept pollen? So that's that might be something we could talk about in the future, because I'm trying to teach a lot of people how to be aware of that and pay attention to their own corn.
Definitely.
So I've been able to plant. I'm surrounded
version.
by GMO corn growers, and when they didn't plant this year, I was like, why didn't you guys plant? And they told me that Monsanto's holding on to all the seeds right now because they're going to decide who gets to plant. When the pandemic hit, they didn't just freely hand out seeds. They picked and choose, they would pick and choose who they're going to actually let plant this year. So that controls all the cattle and many other things. And so that was kind of scary. Someone else determining your sovereignty, and whether or not you're going to be in business anymore or whatever.
Definitely. Wow. Well, and kind of, I have many thoughts, but I guess the last question from Abba is, she's wondering if either of you are measuring nutritional density in the traditional varieties of food that you're growing.
I haven't measured quantities of that for me personally, but we do have students that are in food studies right now who are interested in doing that kind of thing. We know the basics of what is present after the nixtamalization process occurs when we use our wood ashes and stuff, how certain foods are, there's certain elements that are not present if you don't participate in that process. You have to do the nixtamalization in order for there to be calcium in white corn. There's certain things that aren't present until that happens. So we're actually working with some Indigenous studies students right now that are wanting to do the nutrient content of the food, so that we could actually give out figures of how much nutrients are coming out per acre instead of numbers, like how many, you're getting this many cobs, but how much nutrient value is coming out of that. So that's kind of in our next project.
Oh, very cool. And with that, I think we should wrap it. I want to say thank you so much to Angela and Becky, and everybody. Make sure to check them out on Instagram and follow them and everything. And I believe the baking demo will begin shortly. Thanks, everyone.
You all so much.
Thank you.
It was incredible to hear your stories. Yeah, we are going to hear from Adriana from Three Sisters Nixtamal next, and she'll be doing a tortilla and a sopa recipe. So continuing the conversation on corn and nixtamalization very soon. Thank you so much. It was an honor to hear your stories and to learn from you both. So thank you. And
thank you.
we'll see you soon.
Bye-bye.